Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. I appreciate you tuning in as always. I hope you're staying healthy out there as the coronavirus has ensnared every conversation I've been a part of this week. I hope you're taking precautions, washing your hands, and listening to that very catchy Vietnamese song that the Vietnam Health Department put out. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to YouTube and type Vietnam coronavirus song. It's catchy as all get out, and you can also hear it on the most recent John Oliver episode. I've had a pretty great week of doing a whole bunch of stuff, running around New York City, being a part of the artistic community here that I'm so happy I get to be a part of. And today on the show, I sit down and I have a chat with another member of that New York City artistic scene. I'm going to sit down and chat with musician Matthew Milligan today. Matt plays bass for the band Wheatus, who you might remember from their big hit song Teenage Dirtbag. Matt also plays with Mike Doughty, formerly of Soul Coughing. He plays with him for his solo stuff. He also plays with MC Frontalot and MC Lars, some of my favorite rappers and favorite people here in New York. And he plays in a lot of different side bands, including the Ventura Project with his wife. And we're going to talk about all of that stuff today. This conversation, I love when I get to sit down and chat with musicians, because the same way when I do with comedians, there's a kind of shared shorthand language that comes from really being invested in a particular art form and really being a fan of it. And I just really, really enjoyed getting to sit down and have this conversation with Matthew. If you play an instrument or are interested or are a fan of music, there is a lot to love in this conversation. And I thank you guys for being here and listening to this. I want to real quickly, I want to plug a few things, and then we'll get right into the interview. I don't know if you have heard or if you've been checking the description for the past couple episodes, but I've started playing in a band. But this started back when I interviewed Mike Borchardt from Nihiliosaurus last year. He hooked me up with a friend of his, and we got that band started. And the band is called Bright Ugly. And in March in New York City, we'll be playing our first 3 shows. March 20th, we're going to be playing at the Underground, which is in the Bronx. And on March 24th, we'll be playing at the Bowery Electric in the Lower East Side. And on March 25th, we will be at Heart Bar in Brooklyn. I will have tickets for the Bowery Electric show in the description, and I'll also have links for the other 2 gigs in the description there as well. If you're in New York, I'd really love to see you guys, because I really love the songs that we've been working on, and I think it's going to be a really fun show. These songs are some of my favorite ones that I've been a part of when in the few bands that I've played in, and I'm really looking forward to playing the music again. It's been, gosh, I guess it's been about 10 or 15 years since I've played music live on stage in a rock band. So I'm very excited to get to do that again. So again, that's March 20th at the Underground in the Bronx, March 24th at Bowery Electric in the Lower East Side. Check the description for tickets. And Heart Bar in Brooklyn on March 25th. I'll also be doing a stand-up show at the Pit Underground March 17th at 6 p.m. That's an early show, so you can come out to that as well. I haven't done stand-up in a while, so I'm looking forward to getting to do a lot of this stuff again. It's very exciting. And thank you guys again for being here. And I want to hear from you. If you enjoy this show and enjoy listening to it, hit me up on Twitter at Comic Will Carey, or the podcast at AwesomeDpod. You can also follow me on Instagram, WillCarey23, and the podcast has its own Instagram account now. You can go to Instagram at Between Awesome and Disaster and follow me there as well. And thank you guys again for being here. I really appreciate it. And let's go to my chat with the bass player for Wheatus, MC Lars, MC Frontalot, Mike Doughty, Matthew Milligan. Excellent. So Stingray basses, like, I feel like they have that really nice mid-rangey kind of tone, but I've only ever They're good for. I know funk players play them, and I know Mike from MXPX plays one. But something about like when I play it just doesn't quite feel the same to me.
When I was learning, one of my favorite bass players was Roger from Less Than Jake, and he played a Stingray. And so for the longest time, I was like, I really want a Stingray. Like that was my thing. And then I played one. I actually bought one, and I owned it for a little while, and it was the only bass I ever bought that I returned to Guitar Center, and I didn't keep because it was really expensive. Those things are not cheap. Like
they're like $2,400.
They are, and at the time that I got it, they were less because this was now like, oh God, it's probably like 15 years ago or so. And when I got it then, it was maybe $1,500. They've gone up a lot.
Yeah.
Which was a lot of money for me at the time. And I was like, I was so surprised when I got home and I didn't love it the way that I thought I was going to.
Sure.
So then once that happened, I was like, all right, well, if I don't love this, I definitely would rather have $1,500
exactly
than a bass that I'm not going to really be able to sink my teeth into, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Because like if you're spending that kind of money and it's going to be like you're going to play it on stage, you got to be really into it.
Yeah, for sure. I've never been that much of a gear guy, really. I love the things that I have that I love, but I've never had that like compulsion to just kind of hoard instruments. I know a lot of people who just like they just want it all, and I've never really felt that. Like if I don't have something that I think to myself, I have a specific reason why I have this, I don't. I'd rather just I don't need it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So on a similar note, I kind of wanted to ask you about this because I didn't. I guess I couldn't pick this up from like listening to records you played on or the latest Wheatus stuff.
Sure.
But you play 6-string bass on some of the Wheatus stuff.
Yeah, on most of the on the most recent record that we did, the most recent full length is called the Valentine LP, and on that one I play. There's an assortment of basses on that record actually, but mostly I'm on a 6-string that was made by Carl Thompson, who is most notable for he made basses for and continues to make basses for Les Claypool from Primus. And Brendan, the singer and kind of frontman of Wheatus, he had 2 basses made by Carl custom for us, which are amazing. They are incredible to play. Initially, when we got them, I think we thought, you don't need a 6-string bass for most things, really. So we thought, we would use them for specific songs where we needed that thing.
Sure.
But they sounded so good, and they're so easy to play, and it's just kind of, I just found myself wanting to use it for everything because it's just so nice. So it's this 6-string fretless. The downside to that, though, is they are completely irreplaceable.
Yeah.
So to tour is always really alarming. Like for a while we toured with both of them because we like to have a backup, and then that became terrifying. So then we started to tour with one, and then I have a backup that's a 5-string that I just like in case of emergency I could do almost everything on that. That's fine.
Sure.
But still to this day, every time we tour, we talk about like, are we being really stupid right now having this on the road? Because if it breaks or, if
it gets
there's
stolen.
so many factors out of your control on the road. If it gets stolen, if like someone crashes into our trailer, you never know. Like so much can happen. So, but anyway, back to your original question. There's a lot of the 6-string fretless Carl Thompson on that record. I also play an electric upright on a handful of songs on that record.
Yeah.
Which I have I even toured with that with Wheatus for a little while. Which is really fun. And then there's a handful of songs that we just had Brendan actually had a Squier 5-string that it became a real point of contention because he loved it and I did not. It was harder to play. It had a real high action on it that we couldn't quite get right.
Sure.
But it had this maple neck that was really bright and extremely punchy, and he loved the tone of it. And for a couple songs, we used it, but it was one of those, like, it actually wore my hand out. I was like, I couldn't even do that many takes on it because it was so much harder to play.
Right, right.
The downside to having an instrument as nice as that Carl Thompson is that you get spoiled.
Exactly.
It's so smooth, and then you pick up another bass, and you're like, oh my God, I have to work so hard now.
Yeah, exactly. What's stuck under my strings? A ruler?
Exactly, yeah.
And are 6 strings, like, tuned just like a guitar but an octave lower? How are they tuned?
They do sell basses like that. Mine is structured that it's the 4 middle strings are the standard bass strings, and then it has a low B, and then it has a high you can choose. So usually I have it tuned to a high C, actually, so it's just the fourths all the way up. But if you wanted to, you could tune the high string to be a B, and then it would be similar to a guitar. You'd just be missing the high E.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So you could have some of the sort of like high string, strummy stuff if you tuned it like a guitar. But I usually do from low to high, B, E, A, D, G, C.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you for indulging me. Because,
sure.
Because I was recently, I was playing around with that Squire version of the Bass 6 that they have, which is just a lower guitar. And I didn't really like it the way I thought I would. Like, I thought it'd be like, oh, it's like a heavy guitar, but it just didn't quite work for me. I think every time I try a bass that's different from like a jazz or a precision, I'm just like, oh, I wish I just was playing my jazz or precision.
It's funny, I just noticed that Lakeland has a 6 the same way. That's strum. It's basically a guitar an octave down.
Yeah.
And I haven't gotten to try it yet. I was intrigued by it. But also, most of the time when those exist, they also have the same kind of spacing as a guitar. You don't have, their strings are tight. They're really close together.
Yeah.
And that almost, to me, to each his own. But when I see those things, I actually think like this seems more like a novelty for a guitarist than a bass player. You know what I mean? Like it seems like a guitar player could be like, hey, look at me with this like low guitar. But for a bass player, I feel like that's not quite giving you what you're looking for to play comfortably and smoothly,
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I'm the same way with like, I would love to play like one of those like super high end basses, but like at the level I'm at right now, like I'm practicing we're renting space in like deep Bushwick, and we're playing, our first gig is going to be in like a church basement in the Bronx. If I get jumped, and get it stolen, it's much more easily replaceable at like $500 to $600 compared to like $1,200.
Absolutely. I mean, I think for bands at any level, that's an important thing to think about. If I'm not with Wheatus in any of my other gigs, 99% of the time I play a Fender jazz bass that I've had since I was a teenager. You know, that's my guy. I know it really well. So much about an instrument is you get familiar with it. You understand how it works. You know how to handle it. You know its quirks. You know how to manage them all. And that's huge, being able to do that. And it doesn't have to be a priceless one in the world instrument for you to be able to get there. That's fine. There's actually I always think about, this was Sonic Youth many years ago. They were on tour and they had their trailer got stolen or broken into, and someone stole a bunch of gear, and they lost the ability to play certain songs. Because the gear was irreplaceable, and they are so big on like feedback and the way guitars responded to pedals and amplifiers, and they had these crazy custom guitars with hacked pickups, and they were just like, we can't replicate some of this stuff anymore. Yeah, and that's
the band is over.
I have such respect for like that sort of a work ethic, but that is what a serious fear to live.
I know,
to travel around with that hanging over you at any point. I think they actually did get a lot of those guitars back because they were so incredibly specific that like if someone walks into a pawn shop with one of those, it's like,
come on, man.
This is not your guitar.
You jacked Sonic Youth.
Yeah, exactly.
I listened to that album growing up.
Yeah.
I just assume everyone who works at music stores is like a big Sonic Youth fan.
As someone who worked in a music store for a long time, that's a safe bet. It's almost obligatory.
Yeah, 100%. That and the Velvet Underground.
For sure.
Dude, I'm like geeking out right now because to me, like I remember like Teenage Dirtbag was like the song that I would hear on the radio all the time, like driving around like my hometown.
Yeah.
And like Wheatus was like a ubiquitous part of pop culture. And I know you've only been in the band in like the last 15 years.
15 years, yeah.
Which is incredible.
A long time, and yet not quite long enough.
Right.
Just missed the very beginning phase with that track. Yeah.
Yeah. Something I wanted to ask you, because we met actually, I think when we first talked was at MC Lars' show.
Yeah.
A couple weeks ago, and I apologize if I came off weird because I had just gotten done skanking on stage with him, and I am not in as good a shape as I thought I was, so I was drenched in sweat. I was like,
it came across great. You did a great job.
Perfect.
And you did not seem like a weirdo at all.
Good to hear. But the first time, and I'd seen you play with Lars at Lars Fest, but the first time I saw Wheatus live was when you guys were opening for Mike Doughty on his on the anniversary tour for the first Soul Coughing
For
record.
Ruby Room, yeah.
Yeah, and you guys were his backing band also.
That was at Bowery Ballroom?
At Bowery Ballroom,
Yeah.
yeah. It was like and then the next day I flew to India. It was a crazy,
Oh, wow.
it was a crazy week, but I had such a good time. A couple things struck me about that show because you were his backing band also.
Yeah, I met Mike through Wheatus a few years back, and then we kind of really hit it off, and we started to do a bunch of touring together, and then he and I especially got along really well, and we had a lot of similar interests and stuff. And so when he wanted to do that Ruby Room tour, he actually had asked myself and Brendan if we would play with him, and then our drummer Madden got involved as well. And it was like the next thing we knew. It just kind of makes sense, when you're touring, you want to have make it as easy as possible.
Yeah,
so
as simple
three
and
of us,
economical as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So 3 of us kind of did double duty, and we played with Wheatus, and then reset the stage, and then I switched from bass to keyboard sampler for Mike, and because he has his kind of right hand man is Scrap, who's a bass player and cello player.
Yeah. Now, something I've been trying to learn more about because I grew up playing rock and roll bass.
Sure.
If you could play guitar, the root note, you're good to go. But I'm trying to learn how to play a hip hop bass, and I found watching you guys seamlessly go between the two quite cool to watch. So, as far as when you're approaching a rock song compared to a rap song, are there things that translate, or is it a completely different animal?
That's a great question. There is definitely some things that translate. I think so much of it always comes down to, it just comes down to kind of taste, and you kind of know what you think sounds cool. I would say just as the most general gauge is in hip hop music, it's so all about rhythm.
Yeah. And
as a bass player, knowing when to play and when not to play. You don't necessarily need to have a bass line. In rock, you can easily have a song where the bass is going da 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 da, and you just have that kind of holding the whole song.
Right.
It keeps that it's like a pad that runs through the entire track. Right. It's always there. It's always this blanket on the song. And in hip hop, it might make much more sense for it to be bump, ba-dum, bump, bump, because you're dancing around a lyric that's not so straight, necessarily. Right. You want to find that little place. For me, the thing that has always worked the best has been to listen to as much music as I possibly can in my life.
Sure.
We referenced earlier a little bit that I ran a record shop for, it was 7 years or so. That was in between Wheatus tours for a long, long time. And the best thing I got out of that job was just being in a room, listening to records for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
And hearing as much as you possibly can. There's no better education than, excuse me.
No problem.
Than just hearing as much music as you possibly can.
Sure. Yeah, that was when I was a teenager, my dream job, my cap was work in a record store. That would be great. What was that shop called? Is it still around?
It is not anymore. It was called Permanent Records. It was for most of its life, it was in Greenpoint.
Okay.
It was on Franklin Street. As a funny little side note, my wife always jokes, I feel like I am much more famous for the record shop than for any music thing I've ever done. If I go to Greenpoint now and I walk around Greenpoint, I get stopped every block by people who remember me from that store.
Oh, that's
it's hilarious.
Cool.
It's great. It was a wonderful, wonderful job. It was there for a long time. We lost our lease. Classic New York story,
Classic New York. Landlord raised the rent. Yeah,
exactly. We moved the shop down to the Gowanus area, and it just didn't quite work. It didn't land in the same way.
Sure.
And on top of that, I was just at that point getting to a place where I always had to leave to go on tours and do other things, and then I hit a point where I had 5 months of touring straight ahead of me.
Right.
And I kind of ran the day-to-day, but there was an owner who, I worked with all the time.
Yeah.
And I said to her, I was like, I feel like this is not fair to you for me to leave for that long and not have the place. So I kind of saw myself out, and then it's mostly a coincidence, but shortly after that, she actually decided to call it a day and, moved on with her life.
Yeah.
But it was a great, great, great time. The shop was fantastic, and I learned so much doing that.
Oh yeah, like just put. I imagine like Empire Records is like the template for that kind of gig.
It kind of is, yeah.
Yeah, and it's cool that you were able to do that in between tours.
Yeah, I was really lucky.
Wheatus.
It's a hard thing with a touring musician finding a job. If you need a job, which most do, finding a job that allows you to do the come and go that you need to.
Yeah,
that's tough.
Yeah, it's a just kind of striking that balance because the stratosphere of people who can just kind of sit home in between tours and records, like musical artists that can do that, is so small, and you learn that as you get older. But what I think is cool now, I really dig guys like you who have this like really cool day job and then have all this other cool stuff that you do. And same with like Schaefer and Lars.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're still doing the thing, but then they have like their home life also. I talked to do you remember the band Alistair? They were on Drive Through Records.
Absolutely.
I interviewed the lead Tim, the singer and one of the guitarists, and just kind of talking to him, like he's got his day job, he has his his family, and then they still go play these huge shows in Japan, and that just seems like that's like not the dream you were fed as a kid, but that's like the dream adjusted to reality. That seems really badass.
It really kind of is. I mean, for a lot of people, there's kind of a new thing that seems to be happening in music where people can actually create something of like a middle class life for themselves. For the longest time, it was very either you were wildly successful millionaire or you were completely unknown. Nobody is listening to you, dirt poor, you're not doing it, basically. Sure. And very little in between. And now, because people can make records at home, people can release records at home, you can make a record in your home and you can have it up on Spotify so quickly and easily that it's really kind of mind-blowing. Even I'm relatively young compared to most people in music, and I can't believe it. It's crazy.
I know.
And it's allowed people this ability to do this really legitimately around other things, however much they need to. If you want to do it all the time, you can. There's opportunities to release your music and promote it in all these different ways. But if you want to do it less, if you want to like create that sort of a world for yourself too, that's also kind of manageable.
Yeah. Absolutely. And both, I feel like both are equally valid and equally aspirational.
Absolutely.
I'm curious to I want to trace this a little bit. Where did you grow up? Are you from the New York area?
I am. I grew up on Long Island.
Grew up on Long Island. Where?
A town called West Islip.
So
in Suffolk County, it's about 40 miles out of the city. So I've always been New York based. Ever since I was a teenager getting into music, I was on the train to and from shows and doing everything I possibly could. Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of knew pretty early on that I wanted to settle here. I didn't finish school, but when I went to school, I went to NYU.
Yes, I listened to you and Lars talk about this.
Oh, yes, there you go. I went there for it was ultimately 3 semesters before Brendan offered me the job, and I left.
Yeah, which is again, as we're talking about practicality, but that's also one of those kind of like sheer happenstance, because so much of this is based on luck, and I view luck as, I heard someone say that luck is preparation meets opportunity. So
yes.
Like you're ready for the thing to come along. Like the model now is that I think in show business is that you get a people who know you on the internet, but then if you don't have the thing, then you're kind of screwed. A couple of years ago, there's a fairly well-known YouTuber who got Montreal's Just for Laughs festival and completely bombed and had a breakdown on stage because he didn't know how to be on stage and tell jokes. Okay, so this is kind of this is the narrative I'm threading, because I think and I've had this theory for a while, especially when it comes to punk rock music, and Wheatus are not a punk rock band, even though I like how you and Lars talked about how people kind of feel like they are. Because
of the era the band had some success. We're like right up against a lot of the pop punk movement, which has put us in this funny position. Yeah.
I think it's because the chorus of Teenage Dirtbag has that classic like dun 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 dun, and people who just kind of listen is like, it's that.
It's pop punk. But you know what's funny about that? I don't mean to do a tangent, but
I love tangents on this on this show.
It is very pop punk, but also, I hope Brendan won't mind that I'm blowing up his spot here. I think he's talked about this before. But do you know what else it is very, very, very similar to? It is "Pour Some Sugar on Me" by Def Leppard.
I was gonna say that because before you came over here, I looked it up and I started going, oh.
It really is. That's like very, very close. And Brendan knows it. I think he's admitted that publicly before. It's fine because it came up in conversation because Weezer years later did the song Beverly Hills, which is also very similar.
Yes.
That has a very similar
it kind of has that dunk, that same kind of like stabby power chord thing.
It's the 2-hit thing, and it walks in a very similar pattern. And so people said to us when Weezer put out that song, we had some people going like, oh my God, they ripped you off. And we were like, no, they didn't. I mean, we didn't invent that as a concept. It's been around. I'm sure Def Leppard didn't do it first either. I'm sure we could go back further and find other examples of it. But regardless, it's funny that, still that particular vibe. And I think the lyric also had a lot in common with that type of music at the time. It definitely fit into to Blink-182 and Newfound Glory. And
Green
so much,
Day.
Yeah,
all Phoenix TX. Again, that whole Drive-Thru Records. All of those groups. Yeah, absolutely. Like, it wouldn't have been weird to see you guys all on a tour together.
No, certainly not.
That would have been so awesome. I want the industry to make that. So my theory about punk rock, because I'd always wondered, like, I saw Green Day live a few years ago, and Billy Joe told a story about how, when we were coming up, we couldn't get any gigs in New York City. We'd get gigs in Jersey, and we'd get gigs in Long Island. And I think, and I've talked about this before, but pop punk specifically incubates in comfortable suburban boredom.
I think that's very true.
Now, is that what West Islip is like? Because I know some parts of Long Island can be dodgy, but some are like very quaint.
And this definitely would. Yeah, West Islip was definitely less dodgy and more, definitely on the upper middle class side of things for sure. Not terribly diverse.
Yep.
Definitely a very, very like samey type of group of people.
Sure.
Although Long Island itself, to me, especially growing up at the time I was there, it felt like it's a small enough place and it's an isolated enough kind of place that people mingled a lot. Like, I grew up in West Islip, but one of my best friends was in Brentwood. One of my other best friends was in Sayville.
Yeah.
And I met these people through shows. We would go to see shows together. There was a venue on Long Island at the time called the Downtown that was in a town called Farmingdale. Farmingdale? Yes, Farmingdale. And we went there. It's funny, I just was talking to somebody about this. Growing up, you don't know how good you have it sometimes, and the scene on Long Island at that point was so insane that so I grew up going to see like the local bands at the time. Some of them are still the same local bands. Like Patent Pending was really active at the time.
I love Patent Pending. I've been trying to get Joe on. He's great.
Oh, Joe is
love that dude.
They're some of my favorite people in the world. Wheatus actually played with Patent Pending for the first time last year, 2 years ago.
Oh, cool.
At a venue on Long Island called Mulcahy's. Which was a great thing for me because when I was a kid, I used to see Patent Pending, and I loved them so much.
Oh yeah, they were so good, and they put on such a great show.
They're amazing.
Okay,
but,
so Patent
Pending, ASOB, who's now Jeff Rosenstock, who has had quite a decent career for himself, but his band ASOB used to play all the time, and then the bands that started small but got big very quickly, like Taking Back Sunday and Brand New and Glassjaw. All of these bands were like just kind of up at the same time. But the point being that there was, at the Downtown, a touring band would come through, right? And a band like Patent Pending would open.
Right.
And it would be packed, sold out, doesn't matter which day of the week. Then, like 2 days later, Patent Pending would headline that same room, and it would be packed and sold out. It was crazy.
That's
and
awesome.
In retrospect, it was so wonderful. Like, I can't believe that there was a spot where these local bands were so like respected and supported and cultivated, given the opportunity, like to go and do a show and open for Andrew WK or some big touring act who was coming through town. And then the next week we'd all go see them just do their own headline show It was wild.
Yeah, that's
so great. And it's no wonder that so many of them actually had success. I mean, varying degrees of success, but still, like, they it was such a supportive environment.
That's so awesome. And the downtown, that was the name of the venue.
That was the name of the venue, yeah. And it closed. It's now a bar of some kind. But and unfortunately, I don't think Long Island doesn't really have a place like that right now. There's a place called the Amityville Music Hall that is pretty cool, and I've still gone through there a couple times. But there's also a place called Revolution. There's a handful of venues on Long Island, but I was very lucky. I think my particular generation had a real special thing going on there for a little while.
That's awesome. It reminds me of. Have you ever played? Do you remember the Recker Theater in Towson, Maryland? Did you ever play there?
I don't think so. No.
It was this great concert venue that is now a nightclub and DJ spot, and I think a hookah lounge, such as the times. But when I first got to college, because I grew up in like the quite literal middle of nowhere and really suburban, and not even suburban, like very rural Maryland. And when I learned, I can walk to Chinese food will deliver to my house, and I can walk to Barnes and Noble, and there's a concert venue nearby. I just started going to shows every single night.
Sure,
I was losing my mind, and I saw. And then when my band in college, when we got a chance to play a show there, was like the biggest deal, and it was just so amazing, and like everyone was like helping each other out, and like we were finding spots, and like it was a really cool time to be creative and doing things.
It's an amazing thing. I mean, really, like, it's not realistic, unfortunately, but every small town should have a place like that for artists to be able to play and for kids to go, an all ages venue where kids can go see touring bands and their peers in most cases perform. I mean, that's just like, that's how you get a scene. It's really that simple. Like, if you give people a place to go, and of course in some cases if you don't give them a place to go, they'll make one. They'll go to someone's basement and they'll do whatever they have to do to play the show. Like, sometimes that yields just a different type of, brand of punk rock.
Yeah, that makes me think of like the New Jersey basement scene.
Sure,
and all of the great bands that came out of that.
I just went to visit. I was in Boston last weekend. I was actually there doing a show with MC Frontalot.
Nice.
And a friend of mine, Madden, who played drums for Doughty when you were at that show, she has a band over there, and they played in someone's basement. And I went to this basement, and it was so great. It's like this wonderful punk rock. I forgot. I haven't been to a show like that in so long. And it was just like, walk in the door, and it's just all these people hanging out in the living room, and then you go down the stairs to see the bands that are playing. And it's just like, it's about like the size of this room that we're in right now, but there's like 50 people just slammed together, and you're like, this is unsafe. This is not great. This is definitely not like the only exit is this thing, but like it's like ill-advised, but also so wonderful. It's just like, it feels great. Something about that is so exciting and uniquely special.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I feel like, for a lot of those kids, like, it might be the first time they're like experiencing like a kind of independence, like they're doing something that they weren't like dragged to, maybe.
Absolutely, yeah. It feels so exciting, and I mean, it is literally like, what's the right word? It's you're breaking the rules. You're being rebellious.
Yeah,
you're
doing
this thing you're not supposed to do
for the first time, and it's kind of cool. Yeah. So seeing these bands, that like, so this is kind of like instilling, like, are you like, I'm going to be a musician, like going through these bands, or were you already like a musician at that time?
No, well, I started playing bass when I was 14. So I definitely started playing right around the time that I started going to shows a lot. It's funny, I never thought that much about being a professional musician. I was very practical as a kid, and I thought to myself, some part of me was like, well, this is a real long shot,
Sure.
I was a real overachiever as a kid. I was like top of my class, like AP student. I was really, really, really studious, and it's actually why I was allowed to go to shows. My parents, to their immense credit, I was such a good student, but then every night I would go see these bands, and they were just like, well, we can't say no because he's doing everything. Like, I wasn't fucking up. I was doing everything right. And so they were like, well, I guess if he's still getting good grades and getting on the train every single night to go to, see Pennywise at Irving Plaza or whatever, thing I was doing at the time, which was,
cool,
that kind of thing. They let me do it. And but so despite all that, being the good student and this sort of like practical kid I was, I thought this is unlikely to become. I knew the odds were against me, so I went to NYU to study music.
Right. Because like having the knowledge of like theory and to be able to play different styles, that lends itself to the like I guess being a studio musician was more of a thing then, or just being in New York. And I follow a bunch of different like music YouTubers on YouTube, and they're just showing like, oh, I went to Berkeley and I just go around and I'll learn this set to this jazz gig in an Uber on the way to the gig, and then I'll sight read on an iPad. Like that's definitely a path also, and that sounds like that's what you were on your way to.
I was thinking about that kind of thing. I also was thinking, somebody told me very early on, and it's funny how things change, but somebody told me very early on, like, even if something doesn't work out with music, at least you have a bachelor's degree in something.
Yeah.
Like that was significant enough. And I was like, okay, well, I guess that makes sense. So I went to NYU and I studied, it was a music degree, which is just like a generic name for everything. But I was focused on what they called music technology, which was recording techniques, production, learning how to operate like Pro Tools and any like studio type stuff. And I did that for 3 semesters before I left.
Because Brandon, and then how did you get hooked up with him?
Oh wow, this is a great segue because I was just talking about how my parents let me go to all these shows. So I was probably a junior in high school, and my friend Andrew is from Brentwood, who I mentioned earlier. He got 2 free tickets to go see AC/DC at Roseland Ballroom. It was like a special album release. Like it was a radio show, basically.
Sure.
It was like not a public ticket show. And he won them at the local record store.
Cool.
He called me. He was like, I just got 2 tickets to AC/DC. We're going. I was like, great. And for whatever reason, this is the one night that my parents said no. They were like, you can't go. You have to stay home. And I was like, what? Why? And to their immense credit, like, I was like, no, you don't understand. This is AC/DC. This is like a really important show. And they were like, you would say that about anybody. And they are absolutely right. I definitely would have.
Sure.
But it really was like a big deal show. They said no. I was not allowed to go. So Andrew, instead of inviting me, he invited our friend Craig from Sayville. Andrew and Craig go to the show. And Craig, who's there in my place, is in the audience, and he sees and recognizes Brendan from Wheatus.
Whoa.
He walks up to Brendan and says, are you Brendan from Wheatus? Can I get a photo? Brendan, now, when we tell this story, he is like, he said he had never been so dumbfounded in his life that he got recognized at an AC/DC show. Like for him, it was one of the coolest things. He couldn't believe someone knew who he was.
Sure.
And so they took a picture together. That picture is still famously hanging in our studio of these two, like on a disposable camera, And they kept in touch, like, after that. And that was my connection. Craig was talking to Brendan, and Brendan noted that their bass player of many years was moving on, and Craig was like, I know a guy, and gave Brendan my number.
That's spectacular.
So, again, going back to the whole luck thing, this is the perfect example, right? Like, if I had gone to that show, I wouldn't have recognized Brendan in a crowd.
Right.
It wouldn't have happened. So the fact that I didn't go was the entry point that got Brendan to know my friend Craig, which put us in touch.
That's mind-blowing.
Isn't that the craziest thing? I still can't believe that story.
That is like one of those literally insane kind of pure happenstance where you just think about what would my life be like if that didn't happen.
So weird.
Yeah.
So weird.
That's
and
so
to this day,
insane.
My parents think they don't know why they said no. Because they knew, like, I used to go all the time. And my mom just had one of those moments. She was like, you know what? No, I'm your mother. And you are too young to be going to the city every single night. And she just put her foot down about it.
And they've heard this story? I
Yeah,
imagine.
they know this story now.
Are they like, see, there you go? Because that's the kind of thing I totally would have had that argument with my dad if we grew up around here, and if I had that experience, he would never let me forget it.
No, they do love the fact that worked out in their favor so much. Yeah, and it's hard to dispute now. Side note: I never got to see AC/DC.
Oh,
never in my life, and I it's kind of too late now, I guess. It's funny. Like every time they've toured, I've had a reason why I couldn't go, and now more and more band members have left or died, unfortunately,
or passed. Yeah.
So I've still never gone. And now a part of me, I've like resigned myself to like maybe it's just fate for me that I'm not going to see this band, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I do love AC/DC.
Oh, I love them so much. Like part of my musical education and when I wasn't like, because my record store was Target, Walmart.
Sure.
So after I got out of my like horrorcore rap phase and my rap metal phase,
nothing wrong with that.
I started and I was like, okay, and then I started was like, for a while I was like, okay, do I want to be in a punk band or do I want to be in like a radio rock, modern rock kind of band like Creed? Those were my polarities in high school. But then once I started diving into like, the only way I got exposed to older stuff, because my dad was not helpful. He played me Don McLean. I liked him. I laughed when he played me Ted Nugent. And when I was a kid, I thought Stairway to Heaven was boring.
Sure.
But VH1 used to play Behind the Music, and that's how I discovered 80s hair metal. That's how I discovered AC. To me, AC/DC were like the most punk rock, classic rock band.
Yeah.
Because their stuff is like, you stab a couple of A chords, you say something rock and roll, and then everyone loses their damn minds.
AC/DC did a really good job of being. They had this funny line where, like, by comparison to so many other bands of their era, they weren't that showy. Even though they were still a metal band and they still were kind of showy,
right?
But they didn't do the whole hair metal thing. They weren't so.
With the exception of Angus, there was no like gimmick.
Yeah, they seemed so much less gimmicky. Like they were just up there doing their thing, and they, as best you could tell, like they really didn't care if you liked it or not. Like it was just this is us doing our thing, and that's very punk rock. I think that their aesthetic felt very similar, especially compared to a lot of the metal music of that time.
Yeah, especially you ever hear of the Vinnie Vincent invasion?
No.
They were he was this guy that he's not famous, but I think he was kind of hard to work with, but he was in a lot of famous hair metal bands of the era for like a second. And the Vinnie Vincent Invasion are the most ridiculous, over the top hair metal you will ever see. like not quite that dude playing a 4-neck guitar, but similar, and playing like so ridiculously fast, like just like not even Wendell and Wendell, it's just like bzzz, like binary almost. Okay, so you get in Wheatus, and then you start touring with Wheatus, and you guys have played all over the world.
Yes, pretty much.
I can't remember if you said this on Lars's podcast, but it's something I ask bands that tour a lot. Have you ever played Japan?
No, I have not
yet.
played Japan.
You got it, because it's a great country.
I am so. It's actually like probably at this point number one on my list of places I really need to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, we have not. The band has never, not even just in my time, the band has never played in Japan. Isn't that crazy?
That's so crazy. Like,
know.
Just Japan, or like any part of Asia. I've traveled a lot in Southeast Asia, so it's on my.
I don't think the band has ever played in Asia. We've done, the closest we've come to that part of the world is Australia, which we've done a handful of times.
Yeah.
Which I realize is not that close. It's a very, I feel like American. Naive thing to like,
it's closer so I get what you're saying,
but I remember at one point we did Australia, and I thought, it'd be so fun to like go to Japan, and you look and like, that's really far. It's like,
right,
that's like a 12-hour flight to get from like Sydney to, it's not even remotely close.
Yeah,
but some part in my brain is like, it's just the other side of the world, and everything is there together,
Yeah, when you kind of get over there. How do you find Australia? My perception of Australia is that the crowds are rowdy, and the only reason I think of that is because Art Alexakis from Everclear has that great story about getting hit in the face with a boot, and then wanting to storm off stage, and then Craig didn't want to go off stage, and then they started fighting on stage. So that was basically the night Everclear almost broke up.
Wow.
So I'm curious what your experience of the shows are down there.
Great. I love it there. I think it's fantastic. The people are wonderful. It's definitely a little bit rowdy, but I wouldn't say, another place that Wheatus plays a lot is Scotland, and they are rowdy.
Right.
They are definitely rowdy. So I wouldn't say Australia is maybe more than that, but Australia is uniquely special. It's a very strange. My favorite thing about Australia is that it's incredibly far away, as we were just saying.
Yep.
Like, you go this great distance, and then you get there and you get off the plane and everyone still speaks English. So you're like, oh, okay. So this is like very close, but everything's just like a little bit weird.
Sure.
It's like you've entered a bizarro like alternate universe because like all the trees look different and all the birds look different. Everything's different because you're in like the complete opposite. You're in the other hemisphere, and it's all just like everything's off. It's just so strange. It actually just kind of feels like you've entered into another dimension. But a good one. It's great. And it's just like, the pigeons have these crazy long beaks that look like dinosaurs, and all of the trees look like they're through Jurassic Park. And it's just it's great. It's like you can just wander around and just stare at everything in awe. And you look like one of those weirdo tourists that's just amazed by the most basic thing.
Yeah, the same kind of people that like if you're in front of them in Manhattan, you're like, what is your fucking problem?
The people who are taking pictures of pigeons on the side of the road, and you're like, oh my God, you got to get out of my way.
Yeah.
You're taking a picture of a pigeon in front of the subway. It's like, I gotta go.
Exactly. Yeah. I have somewhere to. I got to be somewhere in 20 minutes. It takes 25 minutes to get there.
Yeah.
And you are in my way of accomplishing my goal.
Exactly. Yeah, that was me in Australia. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And we just I'm curious also of your experience of, because we just still play pretty in the UK a lot. How is your experience of the UK specifically? I always imagine like Scotland. If Scotland's very rowdy, I imagine like England being very like well done.
Yeah, they're not quite as proper as I think we would think that they are. They definitely can be very rowdy as well. The UK has been so good to Wheatus over the years. Like honestly, for a band that's been around as long as we have, there's been definitely some ups and downs and changes in our popularity or our ability to draw for a show. And the UK has been our most consistent. We've toured the UK every year. We've done like a 4 to 6 week tour of the UK every year since 2010.
Cool.
We took 1 year off in 2008, I want to say, maybe 2009. But generally speaking, we go over there all the time, and we always have big crowds who are so up for it. We have a lot of love for the UK, and the UK covers Scotland. You have to be very careful there because they're all different.
Yeah,
England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland,
and Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. I mean, everyone over there has been very, very, very good to us, and they're always great shows. People are usually really, really down for a party.
That's
over there.
That's super cool. I just love the music culture over there. Like even like when I was just like walking around Liverpool, I just walk into like a random pub and there would just be someone like just singing cover songs. It's like that's cool.
Liverpool is one of my favorite places in the world. But even aside from that, I love Liverpool so much. We have a lot of our crew is actually based out of Liverpool.
Oh, cool.
So usually at the start of a tour, we'll go there and we'll like set up camp for a couple of days before we hit the road. And I love it there so much. I think that we've talked about this a lot in Wheatus, but I think that in the UK or that part of the world, I think they remember more. I feel like there's a little bit more loyalty with music, and a little bit. I think in America there's a tendency to kind of like chew things up and spit them out. Like you enjoy something a lot for a little while, but then you kind of move on. Some things become classic, of course.
Sure.
But I think we definitely have a tendency to drop something in favor of the next thing.
I think so. I agree with that completely. Chuck Klosterman, in one of his books, he talks about the difference in music fans. I think he was making a comparison between men and women. I don't think that's exactly the same.
Sure.
But I think you either love something very intensely for a very limited time, or I think he made the example of like, there are some Warrant fans that were still buying all the new stuff.
Right.
Or have you ever seen the Anvil documentary?
Oh, sure, yeah.
They have that one big show in Japan. They're playing 9 a.m. and then they have this great show. I agree with you completely. I think there's I feel like I don't know if it's related to like football culture or not, but it's like your team is your team.
Your team is your
and
team.
And it's your team for life.
Yeah. I think you can do it in America too. I think you can run out the clock a little bit. Like, and this is something I talked to Lars about recently. I talk about this all the time because it fascinates me. The idea that if you can survive long enough in this world, it's almost like you win by default. And that's not to put it down in any way, but there's so many bands. Like, I just find myself drawn to a lot of bands that make music like this. One of my favorite examples is They Might Be Giants, who obviously have had some success over the years, but when I got into them, it was the early 2000s, and they were not taken seriously as a band.
Right.
They were like goofy, and it was like strictly for the nerdiest of nerds to like this band. And now, a few years later, they're going out and they're doing, it's the 30th, I have that right? It's the 30th anniversary of Flood, which is like their breakthrough record. Not even their first record, but their breakthrough record.
Wow.
And they are selling out every show that they play. Like, I used to just go see them, and like they were like, oh, they're playing in New York, let's just go to the show. And now they have sold out, is it 8 nights at the Bowery Ballroom? Like, it is mind-blowing to me, but I think it's a great example. I honestly, like, at a certain point, if you've been a band for 30 years, you can't suck. You have to be good. Like, even if someone doesn't like you, they'll be like, well, I mean, what can you even say? Like, they're obviously doing something right.
Oh, absolutely.
And I love bands that can play the long game like that. And we've talked about that a lot in Wheatus, where I feel like we're not quite there yet, but this is the 20th anniversary this year of the first record, and we're planning all this touring to do that. And you start to get that sense of like, for a long time, our cred was not very high. Like, you know, and it's fine. Like, we are more than used to it, and we had a lot of
the one-hit wonder.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, exactly. We knew that that's how a lot of people thought of us, and people will still. That's totally fine. But at a certain point, you start to notice that the tone changes, and it's like, oh, it's this band that's been busting their ass out there for over 20 years, and they're coming around on tour. Like, well, let's check it out. You know, it really does. People really respect that.
I respect it, and to be doing the damn thing after all that time is an achievement. Absolutely, and without falling trapped to like, without even having to get like regular jobs or like or like going like the VH1 like sad tragic like OD in a hotel room kind of thing. Just like,
there were offers for that for a little while. We didn't take them, which was really good actually. I'm glad we didn't.
I'm excited to hear that too.
Yes.
So something I was and here's the other comparison I'll make to that. Like you have this one song, and this is almost kind of cool too. You have we just have this one big song that is widely known, and then the cool people, the people that will continue to come and see you, they'll find like, oh, I got to check out the new stuff. Oh, it's really cool. And in Wheatus's case, very different sounding. I'm going to make an odd comparison, but I swear it'll make sense.
Great.
Not unlike Hanson, who you covered recently. I loved that cover.
Thank you.
I thought it was really well done. So Hanson like have this. They're basically a boy band.
Yes.
They have this big teen pop thing. Not even teen pop. They have this huge pop song, all the classic 90s screaming teen girls thing.
Yeah.
And then they just continued being a band and putting out records and putting out good records. Like, if anyone, like my first girlfriend in college was flabbergasted that I liked Hanson. And then she was like, here is all of their other stuff. And I was like, oh, I hadn't heard it. And it's all very good rock, like, you know, indie rock kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I love when bands can surprise you like that in a great way.
When I was in high school, my girlfriend, who I was with for a long time, spilled into college. She loved Hanson. It was her favorite band. I went and saw them with her twice. This would have been 2003, 2004, something like that. And they were so good. And you could tell at one of the 2 shows I went to, and they actually did release this on a live record, but one of the 2 shows I went to, they did a Radiohead cover. They covered Optimistic by Radiohead, and they opened with it. and I just remember thinking, I was like, these guys are out here just doing everything in their power to show everybody, like, we are no fucking joke.
Yeah.
Like, this is serious. We take this seriously, and we bust our asses to do a good job. And it was amazing. I have a tremendous amount of respect for those guys. And to a degree, we followed the same approach with our live show. I mean, for years, like, again, we know, like, even now after this amount of time, there's still going to be plenty of people in our crowd who are only there because they want to hear Teenage Dirtbag.
Sure.
So if we can show up and we can convince even just a percentage of those people, show them with our, the rest of our set, like, wow, I really underestimated this band. Those are the people who will check out the records and who will come see us next time. And we've done that and managed to successfully really greatly increase the size of our crowds, especially in the UK. Like, we've, the one-hit wonder thing, still, for most people who are not in music, would definitely think that of us. But among people who come to our shows, they are well aware now. Like, we do shows. Actually, the best way to illustrate it is we do shows over there by request.
Yes.
We don't write set lists. We walk out on stage. We have no idea what we're going to do. And we let the audience yell out songs. And when we started doing that, it's probably about 10 years ago we started to do that. And when we did, we would have some nights where people in the crowd would just yell Dirtbag over and over and over again. And it was
same with Doughty and the people yelling,
Sure.
play Super Bon Bon.
Super Bon Bon, yeah. And it was like kind of a bummer, like, but we would have to just fight through it and like just convince those people. Now we go over there and we do the request thing. And if somebody yells Dirtbag, usually half of the crowd yells just like, shut up. Because they know that if we play Dirtbag, it's like the show's coming to an end. It's not usually our very last song, but it's close to the end. So it's become like a joke on our stage now where Brendan will say like, oh, is it time to play Dirtbag? And the crowd's like, no. Because we don't even know how long we're going to play sometimes. Like, we can do, if the crowd's up for it, we'll play for, an hour and a half, 2 hours. But if the crowd's like, oh yeah, play Dirtbag, then we'll do 75 minutes or an hour. We really do let the audience dictate the type of show. But we've seen it change over many years. Like, that has been our, we've considered that proof of like a job well done, or at least a mission accomplished in terms of
exactly
getting people stoked to hear more than just that song.
Yeah, you get people coming in thinking it's like, oh, these Wheatus are not a one-hit wonder. They are a real band.
Yes, especially for people who think we're a one-hit wonder, and then you call for requests, and people are just yelling all of these songs. People are like, oh my God, I had no idea that this audience is this into it, and that they have such a breadth of a catalog that people are yelling all this shit from records I didn't even know existed. Yeah,
I really and to improvise like that, like the only other band that I've ever thought of that can think of that does that is Fugazi. And if you tell me as a comedian, like, okay, 100% ad lib set, go up there for 8 minutes, I'm terrified.
It's almost like the equivalent in comedy of doing a full set of like crowd work.
Yeah,
right? You have nothing prepared.
Yeah, and you're just gonna go up there and like, okay, it's like, okay, I'm gonna riff on that guy's shirt for 30 seconds, and then we're gonna see how else this goes.
Yeah, there's something I love. This came up a lot when we did the tour with Mike Doughty. His music is very improvisational.
Yeah.
And the structure of a song will change. Like, he will on the fly cut a verse. He'll double the chord. Like, he'll do these things, and the band just has to keep up with him. It's very jazz, or almost like a funk background to what he does.
Yeah.
But he has a set list. You walk on stage and we have a set list. We know what we're playing, right? But within the songs, there's all of this improv and all of this changing stuff.
You got to pay attention.
You got to pay a lot of attention. In Wheatus, the songs generally are set. Like, we don't really change songs that much. We have a couple songs with like jams in them a little bit. But generally speaking, our song is a song. Like, we know what we're going to do when we start a song.
Right.
But we have no idea what songs we're going to play. And I loved the two sides of the coin there. It was so interesting to walk on stage for Wheatus and have the show be improvised. And then switch to Mike, and then have the show be set, but all of the songs be improvised. It was such a wild... It was like... You had to completely activate the other side of your brain for that portion of the show. It was great.
Totally.
Doing those two sets back to back was so satisfying because of that. I loved it.
Awesome. Yeah, it definitely keeps you bored. Keeps the chops.
Oh my God, yeah,
for sure. That's awesome. Something else I wanted to ask you. Well, we'll start coming in for a landing here shortly.
Sure.
This has been great. The fact that you would even want to come over to my place and talk to me
please, dude.
is so cool.
Again, I had no idea. practically neighbors.
Basically.
Astoria buddies. I love it, yeah.
Exactly, I love it.
Yeah.
I'll probably start running into you around
I'm sure
town
at this
all the
point
time
now you will, yeah.
Yeah. This has been so cool. And I love Queens. When I first moved to New York, I was like, oh, I got to live in Brooklyn. But now I'm so happy to not be living in Brooklyn.
I know. I feel the same.
I love this neighborhood. Something I wanted to ask you as someone who comes into an established band,
Sure,
that have recorded before. What's the first Wheatus release that you played on?
I played on. There was a record called. They actually came out as a pair. So there was 2 EPs called the Lightning and the Jupiter EP, which got released together as a series called Pop Songs and Death. But it was recorded over 2 sessions, and the double set, which we called them EPs because each one was 6 songs long, but they were really long. They really feel like LPs. Those properly came out in 2009, I want to say. But the first song I played on was a song called Real Girl that came out in 2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you come into an established band and you're the new member and you're going into the recording process for the first time,
yeah,
I'm not sure how much I imagine the songs are mostly written before you go into the studio.
Mostly.
What is kind of like the vibe? Well, like where are you at? Like when you are entering into a creative area with new people for the first time.
It's a good question.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. For me, anytime I'm in a new situation like that, I'm very when I'm with people I know and I'm in a comfortable situation, I'm usually very chatty and gregarious and I'm happy to talk about stuff. If I'm not, I'm very much like fly on the wall. Like I try to just take in my surroundings as best I possibly can. In that circumstance, it was helpful that we actually tracked most of those records live. So it was me and the rest of the band. It was guitar, bass, drums, and keyboards all playing at the same time.
Okay.
So I had a lot of people to bounce off of. It wasn't just everyone looking at me on the bass.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it was more about the group and about creating a vibe of everyone playing in the same room, which did really help a lot. There was a lot of nerves for me at that point, but there was a lot of nerves in general, like the earliest days of my time in that band, just because I was the youngest by a decade. I was like a good amount younger than everybody else, and I probably felt like I was way younger than that even. You know, it was just so out of my element in some ways. And
sure.
What was the thing you said earlier about luck?
Luck is preparation meets opportunity.
There you
go. So you come from being a music student to being, again, the dream. Like you're playing in an established band.
Yeah. So I think a huge part of it for me is that it goes right in hand with what you just said, is like that kind of mantra of the fake it till you make it approach, where you're just like, if somebody asks if you can do something,
right,
just say yeah. Even though some part of your brain is screaming, no, you can't, because you've never done it before. But you have to have that kind of faith in yourself that like, I'm going to figure this out.
Yep.
They were so huge. Like when Brendan offered me the job, he was like, do you want to do this? And there was a part of me, I was just like, I'm not qualified. Like there's a million people who are more qualified than me to do this job. I should just say no, because if I say yes, I run the risk of failing and making an ass of myself. But if you don't say yes, you'll never get to do it.
Right.
You have to overcome that hurdle for any time you do something new and scary. I feel like, this applies to so many things in life, but in the creative or in the performance world, it's also it's a real hurdle you have to overcome to just be like, I'm doing this.
Yeah. And that it's kind of exciting to just be like oh man, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that rush because I'm really simpatico with that rush because I do lights and sound for sketch and improv shows in the city, and I didn't exactly know how to use all the software or use a lighting board or a mixer when I started, but I was like, okay, let's see what this happens.
The first tour that I did one tour with Mike where I was playing bass, Mike Doughty, and then the next one he had his other bass player on it, but he wanted to have me out anyway, so he was like, can you play keyboards? And again, a part of me is like, you don't play keyboards. Like, I know my way around a keyboard, but I've never toured on a keyboard before.
Right.
But then I was like, sure, I can play keyboards.
Yeah.
And he was like, great, here's the set. And then I busted my ass because, of course, I'm like, well, I'm not going to make a fool of myself
Sure.
on this tour. And I to me, there's no better way to force yourself to do something, force yourself to learn something quickly and to the level you need to be at than to just give yourself like, well, guess what? You're going to be doing it in front of all these people in 2 weeks. So get ready, get started. Anyway, back to your original point. I feel like in recording, it was very similar. Like it was that part of me, like just go with the flow, try to take notes, comfortably and not be too like defensive about anything. Like if I'm not doing a good job, just try to learn from it very quickly and adjust and adapt and fit into this environment. I'm very lucky that the people in Wheatus, Brendan and then my bandmates at the time, were so great. They were amazing players and they were so happy to give me all of their knowledge and just never made me feel like I was less than anybody else, but just gave me the tools that I needed to do the job right.
Gotcha.
And that was really, I'm very fortunate that I didn't have to deal with. No one ever made fun of me for being behind anybody else.
Exactly.
I'm sure some people do have that experience, but I did not.
It is not unlike when you are a teenager and you have that supportive incubator of a scene out in Long Island.
Exactly.
Where you can see creativity and be a part of creativity. It's the same kind of microcosm where you're given the tools and then also you're supported in a way that ultimately leads to a band continuing to travel around the world with each other and continue to be great.
It's very true. It's very true. That's a great example. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know we've been talking mostly about Wheatus this time, but I know you play in other bands. What are some of the other music stuff you have going on?
Oh boy. So yes, with Wheatus, with Mike Doughty as well, who I've been touring with on and off. He tours in many configurations as he goes, but I've been touring with him essentially since 2015.
Awesome.
I play with MC Lars when I'm lucky enough to be invited to play with him. I play with MC Frontalot when I'm, again, lucky enough. I have, oh my God.
Do you play in a band with your wife?
I do. I actually play in a couple bands with my wife. So
cool.
She actually just made a solo record under her name, which is Joey Slater.
Okay.
And I play a little bit on that. The two of us have a duo, synth pop project called the Ventura Project.
Cool.
We also have a sort of spooky, funky jazz band called Grim All Day. What else? I play in a band called Warm Body. That's this sort of garage punk rock band out of Long Island.
Cool.
Real basement thing, as we were talking about.
Yes.
Super fun. I play in this indie pop singer-songwriter group called Yes Gabriel. With my friend Gabi, who I met through MC Frontalot. He does a lot of Damien's backing tracks.
Yeah, and Damien is MC Frontalot.
Damien's MC Frontalot. Sorry, yes.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Some inside info there. Oh God, I mean, there's so many
That's awesome, man. Your whole day is just filled with different kinds of music, and I imagine if your wife is creative, also that helps in the relationship. Also,
it does. I mean, we understand each other, and we know that we need. We know what we need, to feel fulfilled and happy and all that stuff. And we help each other out in as many ways as we possibly can and be supportive. For me, playing as much as I can with as many different people has made me feel very, it just kind of scratches every creative itch I have. I played with Wheatus almost exclusively for, 8 or 9 years. And then I got to a point where I was for my own... I never got tired of Wheatus, but I also just could feel that I need to do something different and see
to keep it fresh. So then when you go back, it's exciting. Also,
absolutely,
that makes total sense.
And you realize that the more that you do, even again playing keyboards in certain bands, or there's a couple of bands I play guitar for, it all just makes you a better player. Any environment you find yourself in where you're making music, you are improving yourself as a musician always. So it doesn't matter what it is. If it's something completely different from Wheatus, but I'm playing with that group of people and doing something that I really like, I take some part of that with me to Wheatus, and it makes me better there as well. It's just all of it adds up to improving your ability to put on a good performance.
I agree completely. That's why I play in a band. I do stand up. I have a storytelling show. I podcast.
Yeah, there you go.
I also started doing voice acting this year.
Wow! Congrats.
A million different things. Yeah, I've gotten a couple of. I took a class last year, and then I've gotten a couple of gigs. So it's I feel good about where I'm at and about where I'm going. And this moment right now is part of that. So thank you very much.
That's my pleasure. Thank you. It was great talking to you.
This was spectacular, and I will outside of just Lars and Wheatus, I'll come see one of your bands.
Yeah, please do. We're friends now, so we'll keep in touch and we'll hang out.
Awesome, and I'd love to get your opinion on my band stuff too.
Absolutely, I would love to hear it.
Awesome.
I would love to hear it.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it, and thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
That was an amazing conversation. I had such a blast getting to talk with Matthew about just so much great music stuff. I really, really enjoyed that. Thank you, Matt, for coming over. I really appreciate your time. It was great chatting with you, and I'm glad. I look forward to sharing new favorite music with you soon. So that's our show for the week. Thank you guys so much for listening, as always. If you enjoyed this and think you know someone else who might want to enjoy this podcast as well, we are available on every platform you get your podcasts: Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, all the other ones, including the one that you use as well. That's right, that one too. And I want to thank you guys again for being here. You can hit me up on Twitter at @ComicWillCarry or at AwesomeDPod. And you can also follow Between Awesome and Disaster on Instagram now. I'll have links in the description. I also want to give a shout out to my supporter on Patreon at the awesome producer level, Mary Beth Mooney. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to check out what I'm doing over on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/awesomedisaster. Check out some of the things that I've got going on over there. And again, my band Bright Ugly will be playing in New York City. 3 shows. March 20th, the Underground in the Bronx. March 24th, we will be at Bowery Electric in the Lower East Side in Manhattan. And on March 25th, we will be at Heart Bar in Brooklyn. So thank you guys again for being here. I really appreciate all of you, and I will see you next week between Awesome and Disaster. Take care, everybody.